this is Events Demystified, brought to you by Different Events, and I'm your host, Anca. Well, today, my friends, you are in for a major treat. See, there are about 5 event production companies in this country that I personally kind of like to keep tabs on, and one of those 5 production houses that I look up to happens to be Endless Events, and today it is my great honor to have Will Curran join me on the podcast. But before I bring him in, just a little background on Will, in case you lived under a rock and you do not know what's been going on in this world. As the founder of Endless Events, Will Curran has been named one of the most influential people in the meetings and events industry, one of the 40 under 40. He's been one of the coolest college startup people of all times. I mean, come on. You got to give us a break, Will. This is too much. He's been producing in-person and virtual events since high school when he started his first company, and has now worked in the production of large events such as Emerald City, Comic-Con, and Warner Brothers, and Morton Salt, and Uber. His team mission is to simplify the event planning process by creating the equation for an event's perfect solution. And this is exciting, what I want to talk to him about, especially in this world of hybrid events as we're moving to. He's relentless, and his entire team is relentless to seek to be the number one in customer service in the event industry. From event logistics to business development to technical production, Will has a diverse background in growing events and companies to the next level. And also, he has a couple of podcasts, I don't even know how he keeps up with them, that he hosts, and this helpful event blog that I love to sneak on every so often. He has lots of resources to keep you up to date with the latest meetings and event trends. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Will to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Anca. I'm so happy to be here. One awesome introduction, and I'm stoked to be here and hanging out. I love your podcast. So let's talk events.
Well, Will, thank you. First off, I always take such compliments from people in the industry that know what they're talking about. I take them personally because I know what you mean. And it's a huge honor for me to even come across your desk.
Well, I secretly, like most people don't know, that I'm like an avid content absorber, that like I can just go through so much different content that, I think some people are always surprised when they hear how many like articles I read a day and like how I stay on top of everything that happens. I think generally in the world, I like to say, rather than just events industry, but I'm a stoked podcast addict. That's why I think I have so many podcasts of our own.
It's like, can't say no anymore. Like, how many should we produce? 10? Is that a good enough number?
I know, our head of content's like, Will, not another podcast, dear God.
Well, it's a little later in the day here, and as we're recording this podcast episode, it's already been a long day for you and for me, and I'm honestly so ready to like pop this hard seltzer on. And once I do, Will, let me tell you, this conversation can take all kinds of detours, so maybe I should keep that for after. So
I love it.
What I'm trying to say is maybe let's just get to the conversation and see what happens. I would love to possibly start us off with something easy, like a story. Now, most stories that we know have happy endings, happily ever after. But as we've experienced in 2020, that's not always the case in real life. So I guess instead of asking you what your happily ever after is, I want to find out what is your once upon a time story of last year.
Ooh, interesting. Once upon a time story. I think like you bring up this good point too, that like we always talk about like the happily ever after, and sometimes things aren't okay. But I have this quote that I always say, which is like, if it's not okay in the end, then it's not the end. Right?
So you'd go all the way till the end to figure out.
Yeah. If it doesn't work out in the end, it's not the end. So then I'll figure out a way to make it a happy ending in the way. But yeah, once upon a time, Will Curran in 2019 was running a decently successful event company. And, was very much just like, yeah, we're doing our thing. We're growing slowly year after year, do our own thing. And most importantly, have a company that we all love to work at. And We were just hiring new people and just kind of kicking off 2020. And it was kind of funny that we are just expecting a normal year. We're expecting a little bit of growth, but nothing too crazy. And come January, we're like hearing about this coronavirus thing. We're like, and I remember
Right.
being
It's
like,
like,
oh,
I
yes.
heard something in Europe or China. I mean, so
how's it
far
gonna affect
away.
us? So far away. And then, February starts to come in and clients are starting to, like, in March are starting to think like, oh, what, we should plan for a live stream. Some people don't feel comfortable traveling. First case in Arizona starts to happen. We produced an event in February where like we had to disinfect the entire venue, like from floor to bottom in bleach and like crazy stuff like that. And we're like, oh yeah, but everyone's safe so far. No one I know has gotten it, and I said, you know what, this might be just something that's gonna be over in a couple weeks and we'll move on, right? And honestly, I was in a travel sprint. So leading up to March 2020, I was on a plane probably every week. I spent more time away from home than I was home. I'd only spent like maybe a week at home at a time, mainly because I love traveling to all of our clients' events. I love traveling, period. And actually, I was getting ready in March to go on a sprint where it was like I was going to be I was in Phoenix to go to a music festival with a bunch of friends, then going to Vegas for a bunch of meetings, and then flying out to Belgium for a music festival. And then it was going to be coming back to, I think, California to do a speaking engagement at Events Industry Conference. And then I was going to be, going to a client's events. It was going to be like back to back to back for like a whole month straight of travel. And I remember that it was like starting the end of February, everyone started saying like, no, this is something you really need to be like concerned about. And I think that was when everyone started being like, yeah, maybe they're going to shut down restaurants and things like that. And
like something crazy. I mean, who would do such a thing,
Yeah. And I remember just like kind of being doubtful because I was also like, look, I'll push through whatever the heck this is going to be. And I definitely wasn't directly affected with it. And I remember that I ended up going to the music festival here in Phoenix, and people were like, oh man, I can't believe you went to that. Like, people now were like, that was like the first week of March, and people were like, I can't believe you went to a music festival first week of March. But I went after that and went to a meeting in Vegas. And I remember in Vegas, it was kind of like everyone was people weren't wearing masks, I think, at that time. But hand sanitizer, wash your hands was like the biggest trend in the world. And we ended up having this meeting. I remember at the meeting, it's kind of like a mastermind group of event professionals. We're all talking about like, how is coronavirus going to affect our companies? What are you hearing? What's affecting you? And people were starting to have contracts canceled. And I remember like hearing everybody be like, yeah, my events got canceled. And that was the weirdest part too for us. And this is why I think I doubted it at first too. None of my clients were canceling their events.
This is March
2020. Yeah.
That's interesting because everyone that I know that I work with in the production and event industry, this is when they start freaking out because everyone starts canceling in March.
Yeah. We hadn't had anybody do it. And I think it was mainly, I don't know exactly why, but yeah, we just didn't have a lot of clients canceling. So we're like, oh, like no big deal. Like we'll end up kind of pushing through this. And I remember too, like we're in this meeting, everyone's like, yeah, we're canceling like crazy. I'm like, well, my clients canceled. Maybe it's just you guys. Maybe people are just looking to get out of your contract. I don't know, And I was like, whatever, I'll continue to keep pushing through this. And if it does end up happening, like I'll help my clients. And I think we had started doing some marketing, talking to clients about like virtual event stuff because it was something that we provided for years before then, but it wasn't full blown ahead. We were just like, hey, yeah, like if you need anything, if you need an event app, we can set those up all the time. If you need a live stream, we can do that. And honestly, for me, like kind of the pivotal moment when I'm happy, I was in that meeting for Vegas. And I was supposed to basically going from Vegas, I was supposed to fly back home, pick up my suitcase and go straight to the airport to fly to Belgium. And I remember that when I was in Vegas, one of my friends was like, hey, dude, I'm not going to the festival anymore. I just talked to like one of my friends and like overseas. And he says, it's nuts. Like this is going to be way bigger than we think it's going to be. And I remember being like, dude, you're overreacting, man. Like, let's go to the festival. Let's have a good time. And he was right.
You'd be stuck in Belgium still.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
No, it's actually crazy. Yeah. Because what ended up happening is that I woke up the day I was flying back to Phoenix to go pick up my suitcase. And I woke up and checked Instagram, and it's like this festival that was like, we are not canceling. We have one case in Belgium. There's no reason we'd ever cancel. And I remember I was like, I'm going to go to this. And if I get sick, like, I don't care. At least it's the last thing I do because the world's coming to an end. And I woke up and on Instagram, they're like, festival's been canceled or rescheduled. We're pushing it to September or something like that. I remember being like, wow. Really? And I remember kind of doubting oh man, should I still go to Belgium though? This would be fun to go as a team.
I mean, I have the tickets, probably lodging, all of that.
And then luckily, I realized that when my friend canceled, I called up and I canceled his flight for him. So I knew American Airlines was giving back everybody's money for these flights was going on. And so I remember kind of being like, oh, well, it's got canceled. And I remember texting my friend. I texted him as I'm getting to the airport. And he's like, oh, dude, I see it got canceled. I'm like, dude, just pick me up at the airport. Let's figure this out when I get back in Phoenix. I land and I'm like, hey, let's go to like our favorite coffee shop and let's like talk through this. And like on the drive, that 10-minute drive, we have decided like, no, we're not going. Cancel the flights. We're just gonna stay here. And I remember being like, well, this is great. Like my whole week-long trip now is canceled. Like I have all this free time to work on the business. But then I kind of like started having this like realization that I was like, well, if this event that was in a country that had one case of coronavirus and that said they would absolutely never cancel for any reason. Like I remember literally they were showing videos of like the stage getting built. The whole stage was built because we were flying out like 2 days before. And this was like $1 million stage. And I was like, if they canceled and just were willing to lose that much money, I was like, this is coming for us all. And it's going to hit hard. And after I got all the flights canceled, I started talking to my team and being like, guys, like, no, this is gonna be really big. We need to kind of batten down the hatches. And I remember just immediately, like every day I live streamed. Every day I hopped on just being like, I know about virtual events. I'm happy to help. And let's do a webinar about converting your in-person to virtual. And like, let me just get as much value out there as possible. And like immediately, like, and I guess when we get to the happier ever after portion of that piece, it started blowing up. But I remember, like kind of those like next couple of days were crazy because my friend was already in Belgium for the trip. And he ended up being like, well, if you guys aren't coming, I'm just going to like kind of travel around. And we were like, dude, I think you should come back. And then I remember like there's inklings of like travel bans like the rumors started kind of floating around. And we ended up being like, dude, you need to come back like right away. And he was just,
you need to get out.
I want to see Belgium. I think I'm going to fly to Ireland. I've never been to Ireland before. And we're like, no, dude, you need to get back here. So he flies to Ireland. He was in Ireland in Dublin for like 1 day. And then they announced no travel to the rest of the countries. We're not letting anybody else in. And we're like, dude, get a first flight back. And I remember like that sensation of like feeling like, it was going to be huge. But we just kind of doubled down in helping educate, I think was the biggest thing for us. It's just like realizing like this was going to happen. And I think accepting that whether this was going to last 3 months, a week, whatever it was going to be, it was going to impact really hard. And we had a huge opportunity in front of us. And I remember maybe this was a couple months later or a month later, I just remember hearing, I started like doing LinkedIn message campaigns to like everyone in my network being like, hey, I can help convert your in-person events to virtual. I remember getting messages back, no lie, from people that were like, virtual will never replace face-to-face. Like, sorry, but I'm
not interested. What's this thing like, that you talk about?
And I don't know what it was. It was maybe arrogance on my end, but I remember being like, cool, man, have fun not having a job, I feel bad because probably it might be that case now, right? But I felt like I'd stumbled upon gold and no one knew that where San Francisco was. And I was just like digging super deep into it. And yeah, that's when I think like we really started blowing up in terms of like education and things. We were already the third highest traffic site in the events industry, but like we just like really leveraged it to be like, we also have the solution. We're not just a publication. We also can do this for you. And basically, I give long story short, because that's kind of the fun part of the story. The rest is like Will not leaving his apartment for like weeks on end with skipping lunch and not eating for like 3 days straight while he just works his butt off in his office, right? But it was crazy. We tripled our amount of staff that we had. We ended up growing last year bigger than our original growth it had. And things just like blew up and kind of got crazy. And I think it just really helped that we were obviously like in this influential space within the events industry, but it wasn't perfect along the entire way.
I was going to ask you next, because I mean, this sounds like, that happy ending, right? But was there a moment in the midst of the pandemic when you started to lose hope? I know you've had all this, growth and success in the space, but was there a moment when you felt like, okay, it's too much, it's crazy, I'm losing hope, yet you figure out a way to still press forward through the whole crisis?
Yeah, totally. There's a couple moments for sure. I think like that initial like gut wrenching feeling is I remember thinking to myself, okay, you need to start accepting the idea that like this whole company could go under at any point. This just could not work out, and you're gonna have to go like move out of your apartment and go move in with your friend and sell your TV and like
all the automation in your apartment.
Yeah, exactly. All my home automation go away, right? I started thinking about that, and that was like, honestly, I think that thought crossed my mind maybe like 1 or 2 days, as it started work. But the rest of it was just like pure determination. But along that entire way, that's kind of like I think a lot of people felt that way, and that's kind of like a stereotypical answer you have. But there was a lot of times where it was really, really rough throughout this last year. So because we were growing so fast, we needed to expand the team like really rapidly. So I remember it was ironic that literally I was hiring a new CFO like right as this was all happening. So it was really great to have a new CFO in place because I could really have like an advisor to talk through on the financials and investing in this stuff. And I remember being like, I need to hire like more salespeople and people that can do the events. We gotta have more project managers and we got to hire more AEs. And he's like, yep, go ahead and hire an AE, hire a project manager. We hire them, we get them on board and everything like that. And through using kind of my old hiring process, which was very involved with me vetting the people. Since then, now we have a people experience department, which is like a HR department. We now have a whole team that does all this hiring stuff for me. Now, things have definitely changed. But
listening to this, when you come from the AV production world, like when you say you have an HR person, you kind of laugh because you're thinking, okay, is that the lighting guy? Or who's really the HR guy here wearing all the hats?
It's like a straight up, like an actual HR department.
These are for reals.
For real stuff, right? So like we started hiring people really, really fast, and I think that was like one of the big challenges. We hired on a lot of people, and we had missteps. Like we hired people, and then realized we hired the wrong person, like very rapidly, or we hired somebody. Like for example, we learned as part of our hiring process that we had to really vet for people who are willing to be part of a company that was growing so fast. Because if you're looking for a stable and, corporate job, clock in, clock out, you're going to feel gut wrenched when you come into not only like they've already been in the events industry, so they understand this idea that the industry is like, really rapidly changing, crumbling, and also rebuilding at the same time. And it's very stressful. But also then you pair that with people's personal stresses. Then you pair that with the fact that the company's growing so fast. So we're going to shit up.
And you're gonna start figure things out, and you're gonna start like changing things. And if you can't figure that out and can do in that type of environment, not for you. Startups is like Silicon Valley type of person, right?
Exactly. Big part of our hiring process is we realize like we need to vet for this startup-esque culture. We call it like upstart or growth culture that we're a part of now, because we're not a startup. I've been doing this for 13 years now, so in a lot of ways we have more documentation than a startup. Some documentation better than some corporate events. But like just this idea that it's very volatile, makes people feel stressful to be a part. So that was a big part of it. Is like we hired people and then had turnover. Like I think like we went from having zero turnover leading into 2020 for years. Like no one ever left. Everybody was happy. Everything was great. And then we came in 2020 and like we'd hire people and then 3 months later they'd be like gone, or 2 months later they'd be gone. Or, we had people who were here for years that then ended up deciding like, hey, I'm leaving, I'm getting out of the industry or whatever it was. And you think to yourself, like, I think we learned a very valuable lesson, which was that I thought to myself, like, we're in an industry that is currently like in disarray. Everyone's looking for jobs. Like just having a job, the fact that we were already remote pre-pandemic, that was a big part that I didn't really mention, is that we've been remote for 5 years now. So I was like, yeah, we've been remote. We got this down a lot more. It really was kind of like it's cool now in retrospect, but not at the time, slap in the face to be like, no, you have a lot more work to do to make things better. And, in the turnover, in the mistakes that got made, we learned a lot of really valuable lessons that made us so much stronger that now into 2021 Endless is like 100 times stronger than we've ever been. So I think that was one really big like tripping point throughout the entire year, was like having to deal with this. I remember, I think the first time it hit me really, really hard was, I remember we hired a new like a manager for a position. And that manager was here for a long time, was doing a really great job. We wanted to promote them to like give them, more responsibility. And they were like, yeah, I'm 100% in. We're like so excited for this. And then like really rapidly, they're like, and by the way, I got another job opportunity. I'm going to the other company. And I remember like, that was the first time like I walked away from my desk and it just was just like, what am I doing? What am I doing wrong? Like, am I screwing up? But like, I think everything happens for a reason. And I think it taught me a very valuable lesson, which is that like these things can happen. As turnover started happening and we started really coming into our own of what the new Endless was going to look like post-pandemic, we learned, I think, a lot. And like, honestly, it was good for us in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Again, if it's not, doesn't happen good in the end, it's not the end, right?
I think you touched on a few very important things. I think one of them is resilience. You really were able to demonstrate that, if you're resilient and if you keep pushing forward and put one foot in front of the other, you will get somewhere. And the next thing is, which is something that a lot of people don't want to hear, is you grow through challenges and through hardships. You don't always grow at the same rate through happy moments and, easy times.
Totally.
The reality is that to go anywhere and to grow to any place, you have to be able to be resilient through those hard times, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's funny because a lot of the people that I get to talk to sometimes, they'd be like, oh yeah, just give me all the easy times. But you're missing that on opportunity to grow. And if you're not ready to put up with that, then you're not ready in general to do anything in life.
It's so true. What they say, a smooth sea never made a skilled sailor. Right?
Hey, you're the one with the sayings. I butcher them constantly.
I'm on fire today. Like I usually don't have quotes, but you're giving me a chance to drop all my favorite quotes right now.
Will, stop it. I can't keep up.
No, totally.
As you mentioned, you've definitely been at the forefront of virtual events since the very beginning, because this wasn't some sort of a reality that you just started doing virtual events. And this is where I get a little passionate because, there's a lot of production houses out there and they're like, we're doing virtual events and we're doing this. But then 2020 March or maybe May or June was the first time when they started.
Yeah,
totally. Virtual events, even if we didn't call them virtual events, it was part of any event. It was a digital reality of like streaming and creating and reaching an audience that wasn't there in person. We just didn't have that name for it. So definitely. I guess being at the forefront of this era of virtual event, because I'm going to keep using that. And you produce so much good content. And honestly, every so often I would go and check out your guys' blog. I think I receive your newsletters. And you're such a thoughtful leader in this area of event production and technology. And I really want to dive into this main topic of our conversation, which is outside of the box hybrid events. So I guess my first question to you on this topic is, what is Will's manifesto on hybrid events? What does the hybrid event experience look like in your mind?
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this for hours.
We got about 5 minutes. Just kidding.
Yeah. By the way, thank you for all the compliments on the content. My team's the one who makes it all happen. They're the ones who are writing all the blog posts. They're the ones who come up with all the ideas. So I literally wouldn't be able to do the team. So if you ever get a chance to meet another Endless teammate, please give them a lot of love. If you get a chance, go on LinkedIn, find Endless Events as a company, find some contacts and give them some love for sure too. So always appreciate that big time. Yeah, when it comes to my manifesto for hybrid, my definition of hybrid, because yes, this stuff is not new. Like I remember we did like a really janky hybrid event in Amsterdam for when this other events industry conference got canceled, and we did it like using GoToMeeting, and it was like the jankiest thing ever. We did it with zero budget and made it happen, and we didn't feel like we were inventing anything new,
solving a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And Brant Kruger, who's one of my co-hosts of the Event Tech podcast, is like, hybrid events have existed, when people could listen in on the phone to an event in person. So definitely nothing.
Well, I remember like in 2008, I was streaming my wedding via Ustream to Europe because my parents and my family couldn't join, and it was just like, I've got a solution to this problem right now, and I'm going to use it.
Totally. So what I would define that to be is hybrid 1.0, which is kind of like everything pre-pandemic that we would consider hybrid, right? Like we had been doing it for years in terms of like every time we do a general session, they say, hey, we want to reach more people, let's live stream it. Like very common stuff. We've been doing meetings for companies who are, have their main office. They need to have the CEO talk. They have some employees there, but they need to live stream to a bunch of different offices. They need them to communicate back. That's kind of like where you start to get into like maybe hybrid 1.5. But like what I consider hybrid 2.0, which is the future that we need to get to relatively shortly, is the idea that the in-person audience and the virtual audience are melded together so well that they both have a quality level of experience. They don't do the same things necessarily, but they have the same quality experience that whether they are virtual or in person, they would come back to pay, hopefully the idea is relatively the same prices. Maybe the in-person experience is a little bit more expensive because XYZ reason, but, I don't think it's one of these things where hybrid events where you go, oh yeah, the virtual audience, they're going to get we're going to give them the shaft. They're going to get the crappy version. We'll give them, and because of that, the event's going to be free for the virtual audience, but it's going to be $2,000 for the in-person. No, it shouldn't be that way. I think that for a great hybrid event, you charge the same price that you charge virtually as you do in person, but you make a same level of quality experience so that they go, oh my gosh, this is so incredible. I think great examples of this, and I know I just said like, hey, you should probably charge the same that you do on this end, but a great example of this is that people for the longest time used to say, well, oh yeah, why would you ever live stream our event? So many Event Icons episodes where you interview people talking about live streaming, that's the number one concern everyone has. Why would I live stream it? I'm going to lose audience. People are just not going to show up. I'll give you a great example of an event that can be used to drive a great level of quality experience that then leads into someone wanting to come. And that's Ultra Music Festival, huge in Miami, big electronic music dance festival. Relatively, you'd think to yourself, well, you can't recreate the music festival experience online. Now, because of the pandemic, everyone knows that you can watch your favorite artists online and what that looks like. But one thing I always do is I always had a great sound system in my house, and I would always put the festival up on my TV, and I'd listen to artists play. And every single time I watched it, I'd be like, I'm going to buy tickets to go to this next year. And then I landed on a day I had an event, so I couldn't go. But I think the thing was that it made me really want to go to the event and be a part of that in-person experience. But the thing that we have to think about is that's a hybrid 1.0 thinking. We now have to think, how can I get it where it's the point where I'm okay being virtual and I'm going to come back to buy a ticket again next year for the virtual experience because it can't come to the event or it's just too expensive to travel. I think that's a big part of the hybrid experience and creating that same level of quality experience so attendees can also interact with each other. And that's kind of like a little bit part of my 2.0 manifesto is that before it was this idea that hybrid was the virtual audience was a fly on the wall and they maybe could interact with them each other. Maybe you'd be lucky if you got like 1.5 where, like for example, in these town hall meetings we do, the virtual audience got to ask the questions on the same platform and you would see a virtual person's question right next to an in-person person's question. But when it comes to hybrid 2.0, they have to purely be able to interact. It should be that, you're sitting here and you're getting out of the general session and you can bump into a virtual attendee even though you're in person and you can get that experience of what it's like meeting all these different people and they really can commingle with each other 100%. That's what I think true hybrid level experience is going to be like. And, I'm not talking about, think in a lot of ways, I'm not talking about this is 10 years from now. I'm thinking like this is by the end of this year, we should be able to hit this and we should be able to easily do this. I'm not talking like super futuristic stuff because like I'm definitely not a futurist. I don't like to come here and be like, in the future, we'll all be attending events in virtual reality. I'm like, no, like let's not talk 10 years from now. Let's talk about what this looks like by the end of this year so we can get there and make those actionable steps along the way.
So let's talk about how, from a production standpoint, this could be actually put into practice, knowing that, there's definitely a set of expectations regarding cost, networking, experience design, and so forth. How can we manage the expectations, but also provide that experience that you just mentioned?
Yeah, totally. So I'll probably talk about this again for hours, and this is a big part of what Endless does for our clients right now. But I'll give you a couple quick examples that you can take home. First is that the event apps that you're using, they can't be two separate experiences. I keep hearing people be like, yeah, so we're going to have the event app. It's going to be, Cvent and we'll, have the agenda and people's Q&A all the time. And then, we'll use a XYZ virtual event platform that we use for the virtual event and they'll be separate, on there. No, they have to be the same platform. Like if you have a chat, attendees in person should be able to fling up with the chat on their phone and see the chat flying by with all the virtual attendees in the same platform with them. They should be able to see an attendee list and almost not have an idea whether they're virtual or in person, right? Until they schedule a meeting and it says, oh, I'm not actually there. We can't meet at the coffee station. Instead, let's meet at, in this video call. That's when you start to get to that ability is having that same platform. So that's one example, very, very tactical, easy example. Also good cost savings too. You don't have to pay for two event apps. So the second idea that I would give you to be able to run with this is that making the experience for in-person attendees meeting virtual attendees as seamless as possible. So I think, for example, right now, everyone's like, yeah, we'll just have an app and people can connect with each other and everything like that. But here's the experience if I'm an in-person attendee needing to meet a virtual attendee, right? For the virtual attendee, it's actually pretty easy because they're like, I'm just in front of my computer. I don't care. This is nice. I'm in my pajamas. But for the in-person person, they're, they just get out of the general session. They go, oh, I have a meeting with Anca. I need to meet Anca. She's a virtual attendee. What you realize is your experience is that you have to take it on your phone or your laptop, right? Because you have to be on that device. And because you're getting out of the general session, there's tons of people, right? Everyone's talking to each other. The in-person people are mingling with each other. Or maybe there's loud music. You're like, okay, I got to go to somewhere quiet, right?
Yeah.
I know this because like I'd go to conferences and I'd be that guy who's like, I'm going to schedule my actual client meetings and things like that because we're remote around it. So I'd go, oh, let's go find a quiet corner. And you find that like one chair that has an outlet, that has still good Wi-Fi, and you like sit down there. But now you're removed from the event, right? And we'll talk about that in just a second. But the weird experience is now you're just taking on your phone. You're not a part of the event. You just are taking a video call at the event. So think about how you can potentially design an experience where it's not awkward that you don't have to get removed from the event. We were talking about like this idea that for so long, this is pre-pandemic, we were talking about how event designers need to design their events with connectivity in mind because for so long, as the world was starting to go more remote and people needed to get work done, the way that people got work done at conferences was, oh, I got to go do this video call. I'm just going to go back to my hotel room, right? Because it's quiet, there's good Wi-Fi, mainly because it's quiet and no one's going to bother you, right? But really what designers need to do is design it so there's a co-working space right around the corner that around other attendees that has good Wi-Fi and outlets and everything like that. You need to design that same kind of experience for taking those virtual meetings. So then that way, if Anca and I have to hop on a video call, I don't have to feel like I'm leaving the event just to talk to Anca. Because let's be honest, if I go back to my hotel room or go around the corner and you get me in front of my laptop, we get done with the call and I'm not going to close my laptop, right?
No, you're going to keep on working.
Check my email. I'll start
and 5 hours later, you're like, oh my gosh, I just missed all the sessions.
Exactly. And that's also a part of the design, is that we have to recognize that we are in a remote working world now too. So we need to design our events that people are going to be more naturally inclined to probably pop in, do a little bit of work while they're on the road too. So, and since things come in threes in a lot of ways, I'll give one other tip for how you can design these experiences in a good way for them to interact with each other. I think one thing to recognize is that whenever you're designing the in-person element, you're going to want to design some sort of element that is going to lean to benefiting the in-person people. So things I think about are like happy hours, parties, things like that. Like, I don't think anyone, and someone might fix this with technology or maybe comes up with a clever design person. If so, come apply and work for me. But no one's going to like figure out a way to be like, oh yeah, like, oh, there's a happy hour on. Yeah, put me up on a screen so I can look at what that party's like from the outside. No one's going to enjoy that in any sort of way. But maybe what it is that you could have some sort of virtual party going on simultaneously as the in-person one, and maybe the virtual ones mapped around on screens around the way. So you get to see like the virtual people are up in the virtual world, and maybe, still some ways for virtual attendees to still meet in-person attendees. But, I think that you need to figure out some sort of way to make it so then that way, okay, you're missing out on this in-person thing, but you don't feel bad. You're not feeling FOMO because you get this cool virtual thing that they didn't get access to.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to be able to give them a similar, close to experience, even if, possibly might not be the same level, because let's be honest, meeting in person, it's not the same energy as, meeting over Zoom or whatever platform that you're going to network on. Here's one thing that I've heard this thought, okay, and that the future of events might look like, and I hear this concept coming about, more so often now than before. And the concept of conferences moving from like the 2-3 day physical interaction to becoming more of a year-long community of events on some type of a platform that it will enable, the networking, the engagement, the learning, all of that stuff. And then through this platform, then you also would have some type of in-person meetings or some type of virtual streams a few times a year. So basically the idea of this hybrid strategy in which you're combining the in-person and the virtual aspects to build this engaging community all year long. What do you say about that?
I mean, it's funny because like this is the stuff that we've been talking about in terms of like audience engagement. I remember that we did like a video on our blog about like what's on pre-event audience engagement. I think Lindsay's the one who ended up doing the video, and she's like, I think pre-engagement for events is a myth, and same with post-event engagement. It's a myth. For a long time we want it, and we've wanted it because we want to like keep the energy going. We want to feel the same way, but ultimately it's so hard to recreate that in-person element, that amount of intense energy that happens. So this community thing is like nothing new that people have been wanting it, but now it's like people realize, oh, I can use technology to do it. What's funny though to me is that we talk about this, like let's build a community that's year long and that has a little event all along the way with maybe one big event a year or something like that. I'm like, you're basically talking about an association now at that point, right? And it's basically what associations have been doing for so long, but maybe they haven't been doing it to the best way possible. Before it was all about like chapters and in-person meetings and things like that, but now we're saying, how can we translate this online? I'm a part of a community called Sandbox, which is a badass people under the age of 30. I'm not under 30 anymore. I know we were teasing about what my age is, but I'm not 30 anymore. But it's a community I joined when I was in my 20s, and it's an online community primarily centered around a Facebook group of people all over the world doing awesome things. And once a year, they do a summit where they bring everybody together. And there's hubs that are also doing their own events. I think that model of community is really what people are looking for. What's ironic is that community doesn't have any dues. It doesn't cost anything to be a part of it. And what I think it's done is it's created such a unique bond that when you meet another sandboxer, everybody just feels like you're on the same level. I think the thing is that that's a great example of this idea of an online community. Look, we weren't paying for an expensive platform. There's now, they've been doing like online content, things like that. But I think the idea is like, yes, you can create this online community that brings people together around a centered cause, and then that they're only going to come once a year to sort of things and do it online. I think the important thing that people have to realize though is that I don't know about you, but I end up going to a lot of conferences because I am speaking at a lot of them, or I want to be at a lot of events. But if we talk about these community models, it means that people are going to be part of less, because I can't dedicate to go to 12 communities all year long. I'm going to pick one or two to be a part of. And instead, what I'm going to do is, have that narrow focus versus like before, like, I can go to 12 events a year because there's only one a month and they're for that short bit of time. But I think all the evidence and the things that we've been looking forward to in terms of learning, that people, learn by slowly absorbing versus it being intensely brought upon them, is a part of it. People's drive for community, especially right now where people can't meet with each other. But I think the thing is that it's got to be a really, really badass community, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing an event about Teslas and Model 3s and things like that, how is it going to be better than the Tesla Motor Club online forums that already exist? It's got to be way better in terms of design, in terms of the people there, the content that you're delivering. If not, someone's going to look to that free option of that free community, a Facebook group, an association maybe to pay $400 a year to be a part of. Instead, they're going to be looking for something maybe potentially like that. So I think that's something that people have to keep in mind, is that there's already competition within that community space, and it's highly driven. And we also have to think differently about how to design those two.
You're right. It's like there's only so many things that we can all be engaged in. It's funny because this morning I was a little bit on Clubhouse. I don't know. Are you on Clubhouse, Will?
I'm not yet, because I have to say no to them.
Okay, so let me tell you something. So I'm like on Clubhouse and I'm like looking at all these clubs and they all sound amazing. And especially kind of like looking into virtual events and hybrid events in production, things like that. Like I don't go into all the crazy things because there's like a whole array of things that you can go into.
So many.
But I'm like there and I'm like, okay, so I got to do some work. I'm listening, like what's happening in this particular room. And I'm like, how do people do this? Like, I don't get it. It's like, do you like just stay tuned to some of those rooms all day long and listen to random people talk? It's like, but that's a community, right? So at this point, I'm thinking I'm missing out on a whole lot of things because I just don't have the time to engage fully into something that I see the potential. I certainly do, but I'm like, what am I gonna do? Like I can't divide my time that's already like divided in so many different things. Like you said, you have to pick and choose what's most important to you right now. And the same thing goes with that community. Like you're gonna have to dedicate yourself to one of two, whatever, three maybe communities that you're gonna have to engage in. But then at one point you're gonna hit your limit and gonna be like, okay, I can only give so much out of my time and my space and my headspace and all of that before I just spread myself too thin,
Totally. And I think like the personal advice I always give when it comes like, communities and joining communities is like, you have to be willing to like narrow your focus and say no. Like, I got lucky that early on in college, I had a friend who was like, he was actually the ambassador of Sandbox that got me into Sandbox. And he said, there's two organizations I like. It's this organization and Sandbox, right? And he's like, and those are the only ones I want. And I think that taught me a lesson early on to be like, you can't be in too many places at once, right? Like, and especially I learned the bad side of that lesson when people started asking me, be like, we want you to be the chapter president of XYZ association in the industry. Oh, hey, by the way, can you do that over here on this one too? Because you're a good leader. And like before you know it, you're like, holy crap, I'm on 3 different boards already. I mean, I can't do it all, right? So, but you bring up a good point too, this idea that we need to focus on not FOMO as much as we need to focus on JOMO, which is the joy of missing out. And Nick Borelli is definitely infamous for saying the JOMO aspect of things. So big shouts to Nick for saying that.
Yeah.
And I think that very much goes the same way, that we have to create a community or an event or whatever it is that is so good that you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm willing to have the joy of saying no to everything else because this is just so dang good, and having that amount of focus. And so I think also designing your entire event that is just that freaking good. It can't be mediocre anymore, especially because like, look at it now, like their content's available online. People now know how to obtain their content for a year, right?
Yeah.
Imagine like how many attendees used to go to events that like the only way I learn about the newest trends is if I go to the conference. Now they're like, oh my gosh, I can like go on YouTube and learn this now. So it really has to be really, really that good for you to want to be there.
Absolutely. And I like that we touched a little bit on this hybrid models of different type of events. Do you have any other thoughts as far as a conference hybrid model or a meeting hybrid model of event that you can elaborate on more?
Yeah, am I allowed to just tease people? Is that allowed? Is that allowed in some sort of way? So we're actually doing a.
Do you see a set of rules somewhere? Because I
I don't know.
don't.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay, so I'll tease everybody that we're going to webinar. We have designed 4 models of hybrid events and we've named them, and they have branding and everything like that that we've been working really hard on over the last year. That we'll be announcing really, really soon. I think it's gonna be in terms of a webinar where we teach what these models are. I'm sure there'll be an ebook and blog post about it too. So I'd just say, yeah, definitely go to helloonlist.com, subscribe, and stay tuned for that. I will say that there's some really cool models coming down the road, and I think that the big tease I'll give with people is that it's cool to think about all the different models, but more so, how do they work together and how do they sometimes overlap? How do you have A work with D or D work with C and A, and those sort of things. And so we got some cool stuff coming down the line, but I'm not going to do it justice by trying to explain it right now, but instead I'll wait until the full deep dive because it's awesome.
Well, it sounds like we got to do another episode, Will, because
Exactly,
I mean, you're just giving me like the teaser, and I'm like, that's not what I paid for. But you know what I mean? It's like, I'm not content with just this much.
Okay. Okay, so I got to give a little bit more then. Okay. Okay, so
if I have to pull it out of you, watch me do it.
I'll share the example of one, and I think one of the problems is let's see if I can get the notes up on it. Is I want to make sure that I don't do my marketing team injustice by making sure that I give it the names that they actually came up with and worked really hard on. Let's see if I can end up finding it.
Will, you cannot join any more podcasts for a month until we're done with this.
How dare you at all? Here we go. So let me see if I can end up coming up with it. So let me make sure I come up with the good names of it. Oh my gosh. They're all super duper smart when it comes to it. So, okay. So let's talk about like one example of one model, and I'll tease it. We call it the Electron Model. We're super like science geeks over at Endless, so that's why
I love it.
Mine says like create the equation, like that's our big like theming at the company.
The Einsteins of events.
Yeah, Einsteins of events, exactly. So the idea behind the Electron Model is this idea that initially, when it comes to events, venues are going to be really small, and that like I think like everyone wants to rush to bring like 1,000, 2,000 people together, but that's not going to happen for a couple of ways. A, it's not safe, but also B, that attendee trust isn't going to be 100% there. But also too, it gives us this opportunity to slowly ease in back into the idea of hybrid. So what you're going to start with is these small studio or small independent venues. I'm a big pusher right now for independent small venues because for so long the Marriotts and the Hiltons of the world have gotten so much love for having such complex venues that are so well organized. But now when you have an event that only has 20, 30 people, 40 people at it, you can use a little bit smaller venue that's a little bit quirky and a little bit more fun to bring some personality to your event. So this Electron Model is the idea that you have a studio or a small space where all the content is being filmed in, that's being performed in, whatever the heck it is, in a small in-person audience that happens there. You might have a small networking space. It allows you to bring a small catering company, that sort of thing on there. So that's the example of that Electron Model, is this idea of like a small centered point that's going to end up happening with events. I'll tease it at that. Like I said, they layer into each other in some ways and connect with each other. But it's important to know that when it comes to it, we're going to start small and it's going to get bigger. And I think that every event needs to start thinking that way. I think everyone wants the Salesforce, Dreamforce level conferences of 10,000 people. And I love that too. Those events are usually the craziest because they have the biggest budgets and the most like crazy things happen at them. But we have this opportunity to go small and go intimate and deliver this really unique experience that before, if you did that, you'd have to do it like at an insanely high value. Otherwise, you blurred into everything else. But because we're going to slowly ease back into it, it's going to be acceptable for a short period of time. And I think I'll tease with one of the other models. I won't tell you what it's called or any more information about it, but think about what happens when you take an Electron Model event and then you take another Electron Model and then you combine them into each other. So I'll leave you at that on there too.
So
but.
I'm kind of guessing a little bit that this Electron Model event you're talking about is kind of like the micro experience, right? It ties into that micro experience of having a very unique and in so many ways inclusive to a particular crowd, whatever you're going after. Because I've heard this a lot with this idea of a micro experience. Is that sort of like what?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think like one of the ways to think about it is like a super VIP experience, right? Like if you're doing a conference that's going to have 5 keynote speakers and like 3 of them are the biggest CEOs. You got like Elon Musk and Bill Gates and things like that. And they're going to be your speakers, right? And you're going to have a studio space kind of set up. Man, like I can imagine that I bet you as an attendee, you know, I'm vaccinated, I feel safe, I feel like the event's designed really, really well, and maybe, you know, it's still safe to travel and I can travel to it or it's in my local city. I can imagine myself spending a good amount of money to be like, I'm one of 20 people who gets to sit and be feet away from these infamous CEOs. And it creates that, I think, that huge VIP opportunity. And then slowly allows you to then ease into, oh, let's add, you know, 30 attendees, 40 attendees, 100 you know, slowly ease into the idea. And I think that, yeah, it's going to create this super VIP experience. And without the harmful effect, which is that I think that we have to remember, again, people are going to slowly ease into this. And we can't expect that volume of attendees is what's going to make us our money right now. It's going to be the quality of the attendees and the VIP experiences as well.
Absolutely. So let me get to one last question, actually maybe two more.
Only one more?
I know. I want to, you know, obviously we're going to have to wrap up at one point.
We want part two.
I know, exactly. Or it's like, okay, I've already, you know, I only have 10 minutes to listen to this podcast. I'm going to have to divide it in like 4 different segments. At this point, I forgot what they were talking about in the first segment, you know. I know it happens 100%. To me all the time. So going back to the initial question that I had, you know, with being a business owner, entrepreneur, if I were a brand new entrepreneur that I wanted to start an event production business, production company right now, what key lessons should I know and why?
Oh my gosh. Tell all my business secrets. Oh my
Absolutely. Come on. You're teasing me with the models. Now you got to give me something else.
Yeah, I got to give something. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, there you go. I would say the first thing is that when it comes to your company, I've learned a lot of stuff over the years, right? Because like I started this when I was in high school and had no idea what I was doing. One of the first things I think I recommend is that just because everyone in the industry says that's the way it has to be done, it doesn't need to be done that way. And that's like a very core thesis at Endless is this idea like, don't just think outside the box. You need to crush the box and think totally differently. But I think like, especially it feels like in the events industry that everyone has these like unwritten rules and ways of doing things. And I hear it all the time, especially when you hire people who haven't been in like Endless or a company like Endless before or from the industry. They come in with this preconceived notion of what the industry is going to be like or way that things going to operate. And I love being like, well, why? They're like, well, everyone else does it that way. I'm like, no. Like, I don't want to do it the other way. And I sometimes do it. My leadership team sometimes hates me. Sometimes I decide to do things just out of spite of being like, I don't want to do it the way everyone else does it, right? And I'm willing to risk that my way might be better if it means breaking and doing something a little bit more, or being awkward in the beginning, right? So that's one of the first things I think when it comes to it. The second thing I think is when it comes to designing your business, not only do you not want to do it the way that everyone else is doing it, also, you don't have to listen to every piece of advice that you get. Mm-hmm. And I learned this very, very early on and then chose to forget it and then got a rude awakening to how this happened. And eventually what happened is like when I was in the Edson Student Entrepreneurship at ASU, when I was just like starting to become a real company and starting to figure out what this was like, they started connecting me with all these mentors. And I always tried to listen to everything everyone was always saying. And I realized that, you know, everybody was always constantly shoving advice because they were like, oh, you know how to do it this way, do it this way, do this way. And what I taught myself this rule was that like, okay, the first person says to do it, always be empathetic and listen to them and don't be like an asshole back to them, but like just, you know, take it at surface level and maybe bookmark it, write it down. Second person says it, okay, maybe that's just a coincidence that someone else said something very similar. But if the third person ends up saying, hey, you should do it this way, okay, maybe you should check it out and just consider it. So I started doing that for a while to have that kind of 3-check rule. Then what ended up happening is a little bit later, actually probably within a year or so of that time, I started listening to a very specific person because I thought they knew my business really, really well. Mm-hmm. And they had all these ideas for what my business needed to look like. And this kind of relates back to the don't do it how everyone else does it. And I remember that this was actually when I was competing in the Global Student Entrepreneur Awards, which is like an award that basically names the best students, entrepreneurs who are running businesses in college. And this person said to me, you need to consider building your business. You got a great brand right now. And we were primarily focused on, like in the early days, teen events. And we were a DJ company that transformed into a production company, kind of like I guess everybody does these days. And
I know a list of companies that did that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like so common.
They're actually pretty successful. So it's like, not a bad model.
You either go down the route of being obsessed with music and become a musician, or you love all the tools and get lights and stuff and you become production.
And you get geeky. Right? Yep.
Yeah, you get geeky with it. So I chose the geek route. But at the time, you know, we were really confused on our identity. And they kept saying like, oh, well, you have this DJ company and then you're building this production arm, but you're also really good at marketing. And they're like, well, why don't you build a marketing company? And then you build a DJ company, and then you build a production company, and then you have an event planning company. And then they all are owned by one single company and have a holding company. And I had no idea what this meant, but it sounded really cool. It sounded big. It sounded doable. It didn't sound too complex, but I just wasn't sure how to do it. But I listened to that person, and I went up doing the Global Student Entrepreneur Awards and competing locally at Arizona State University and pitching that as like my story for what I saw the future of my company. And I lost. And I realized it took that like loss because I'd been winning like all the cool awards, right? Like you hear Inc. Magazine's coolest college startup, and like my ego was so high, so I was winning everything I could to lose a competition. And then what I realized is that everyone kept asking me questions, these mentors that judged it and said, how are you going to do this? What are you thinking about this? And I didn't have the answers to it. And I realized I wasn't passionate about the idea, and I didn't really want to see it through 100% because I wasn't sure whether I wanted to do it this XYZ way.
Because it wasn't even yours in the first place.
It wasn't even my idea in the first place, right? It was like I was incepted on the idea, right?
Yeah.
Like told me to think about elephants. I think about elephants, but still not my true idea.
Exactly.
And so I think what I learned in this was that people are always going to tell you again what to do when it comes to your business. And if you listen too hard to them, it doesn't become yours. You're going to become unhappy and you're going to want to get out as soon as possible. So I made a commitment at that point within the business to say, like, I always want to continue to build a business that I love to work on. And I found that when I'm super duper successful in business, it's because I'm building a business that I wake up every day and I go, I love what I do. I'm excited to do this. And I've purposely designed Endless, even as we've gigantically grown, tripled the amount of employees that we have now. I've said that I always want to be focusing on doing things that I love, getting to explore new things. And the second that I keep doing that, I'm going to not be motivated and not excited to do this anymore, because then it's not coming from me and what my passions I have, but instead I'm listening to someone else.
Excellent advice. And whoever is listening, if you're thinking about starting anything, just pay a little attention, take some notes right now, because that's a lot of wisdom in there. Okay, last question, Will. This is a hard one. Because I heard something about Belgium. And if you ask me, if you go to a concert to Europe, the only reason why you would go to a concert to Europe is because you're into electronic music. Am I right or am I right?
You're 100% right. Yeah, 100% right.
So what is your top electronic songs of 2020 that you're rocking on right now? Come on.
I love it. So most people don't realize, but I started as a DJ, and I started as an electronic DJ. I was really into EDM growing up before it was really popular and kids just called it techno. Actually, most people don't realize that, like, as I started up the DJ company, I also was starting to pick up steam doing online shows, DJing and playing drum and bass. And so I actually became in this term sense, because now drum and bass is also much bigger now, but in the sense I thought I was becoming an up and coming drum and bass DJ. I probably would have had a career being a drum and bass DJ if it wasn't for the DJ company doing backyard parties and eventually became Endless, right? And so I'm a huge drum and bass head. In fact, that's why I was going to Belgium, was for a festival called Rampage, which is it was like 30,000 people packed in an arena listening to drum and bass, which is, if you've never heard of drum and bass, if you want to get your heart rate up and maybe have it skip a couple beats, it's like 180 BPM. Like a normal house, like EDM song is like 120, dubstep's like 70 BPM. Like a drum and bass is like, and if you don't have good headphones with lots of bass, like it can sound really annoying, right? So I love drum and bass, but I don't know if I can say a specific song, but if you go to willcurran.com, I actually link to my Last FM, which is tracks every song I listen to. So it shows you, it probably can tell you what my number one song is based on what I actually listen to, but take a look at that. That's a good one to go. But I'm huge into drum and bass. Most people don't know this, but I wake up every morning with music playing. I play music in the shower. Like, I'm usually listening to music in between meetings. Like, I listen to so much music, and I actually do still occasionally throw down a live DJ mix every once in a while as like coming out of retirement. So I think my links to all my mixes and stuff are also on my website on willcurran.com. So I'm huge. Music is still a huge part of my life, but I'm just really happy I didn't go down the route of like making musical events. I love corporate events way too much.
And probably they pay a little better.
They pay a little better. And the best part is I don't have to like stay in a tent, and I'm in an air conditioned, ironically ballroom.
I guess
which is nice.
I guess that matters as you get a little older, because when you're 20, you're like, bring them all on.
Yeah,
but then when you're like 30 something, I'm like, am I sleeping again on a cot tonight?
Yeah, exactly. I think I aged a little too fast for most people's comforts too, because I think I was like probably like 20 when I was like, I don't want to like do this 3 a.m. thing anymore.
I love it. Well, I feel like I've learned so much about you, Will, and events and then music choices, all of that. I mean, at this point, it's like I'm ready to pop this open and be like, okay, what else are we gonna talk about now?
I love it. Well, you'll have to tease everybody for a part 2 then.
Hey, it has to be because we need to take to 2.0,
Exactly. Will 2.0, Anca 2.0.
Well, Will, I really, really appreciate this time that you spent with me on the air. It was so much fun. Thank you so much for making time for it. And I look forward to having more conversations coming down the pipe. And in the meantime, just have a wonderful evening. It's getting to be dinner time soon here. And I hope they enjoyed as much as I did.
I, of course, did. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, if anyone in the audience, I'm super approachable. Don't hesitate to reach out. helloanalyst.com, willcurran.com. I'm always happy to help.
You just beat me to it because I'm thinking I'm saying goodbye, but I didn't actually get a chance to ask you, where can people find you? And at this point, they don't have to Google far to find you.
It's pretty easy. I'm so findable on the internet. Like, I actually had to change my email address to be something like incoherent because I'm so easy to find. It's ridiculous. But I'm on every social media network. If you want to find me personally, willcurran.com. All my social networks are at the top. More information about me. If you want to see my anagram, it's on there too. And then also, if you want to learn more about hybrid events or you like some of the more event-related stuff that I'm talking about, helloanalyst.com is definitely the place to be. We have a great newsletter handwritten every single week that drops all the great stuff. Ebooks happening every week, webinars happening every week. Always happy to help educate in any sort of way. So definitely go check that out too.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, Will. I appreciate your time here with me. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.